Hi, welcome to Flite Test. I'm Josh, and today we're going to be showing you how to build the FT Mustang. Now, if you haven't seen our overview on the FT Mustang, it's a really great warbird that gives you all the tendencies of a warbird, but none of the consequences. You can get long straight lines. Also, this one has a landing gear, which our FT Spitfire did not. So if you haven't already checked out the review, go ahead and check this out. The free downloadable plans and the material lists are also on our article on our website, or you can, of course, go to our store and buy the swappable speed build kit. Now, one thing I want to remind you nice folks is if you do choose to support us by buying a speed build kit through our store, please by all means, if you have access to a Dollar General where you can get the Adams foam board and the raw materials, trace out the plane when you get it onto a separate piece of foam board. It makes a great pattern, but also if you want to build another one in the future or share the hobby with a friend, you have a very inexpensive way of mass producing these things at a very low cost. Now, if this is your first swappable and you don't have any of these made up, you're going to want to go ahead and make one of these now. This is basically what we kind of refer to as the beef package. This is the larger motor in our series. Basically, it's anything from a 400 size, 800 kV minimum, and that's giving the lowest performance to fly this, all the way up to what we're running here on the Supo. This is a BL 2217-7 with a 30 amp ESC, amazing power on this Mustang. But the video for building this power pod is not here. You're going to want to go to the link below and build your power pod if you haven't done so already. There's a separate video, also talks about electronics and setting this thing up. That way you're ready for this. Now, it may seem premature into the process to be talking about servos and linkage stoppers, but if you get this set up now, it's going to make your life so much easier in the future. The first thing we did is we centered up our 4 servos and got our arms on nice and straight, and we also, rather than putting the linkage stoppers on our servo arms, we actually put them on our control horns. Third hole out on all 4. Just go ahead and mirror 2 sets of servos and 2 sets of control horns. This is going to make the build process a lot easier. Now we're going to go ahead and start our fuselage. Now, if you're using the speed build kit, everything just needs to simply be popped out. But if you're not, one key thing to remember is that black lines are cut through, red lines are score cut, and blue lines or green lines are indicator lines, just to give you a reference point or someplace to lightly crease. Now, we have all the pieces for our fuselage cut out or punched out, depending on whether you're scratch building or whether you're buying the kit. The next thing we can do right now is simply go ahead and remove all of our cavity areas. These cavity areas are going to be the areas that we use to get our A folds or our B folds, and they're going to be right in here. An easy way to do this is simply fold it 180 degrees and just use your fingernail to pull it off. And if you do this slowly, it'll come out in one clean chunk. What you don't want to see is you don't want to see very ragged edges. If you have that, take a razor blade and scrape off that extra foam. The only thing you want in here is the paper from the foam board. Go ahead and do this on every part of the fuselage pieces. So you're going to have these 3 pieces and the rest of your fuselage, and then we'll go ahead and install our servos into our fuselage. And while I'm pulling out these reliefs here, I'm going to also just go ahead and cut out these little tabs where all of our different formers and our swappable pod's going to be. You don't want to glue these in by accident, and they're awfully close to the folds of the fuselage, so by cutting them out ahead of time, it'll make your life a little bit easier. So we have all of our tabs, all of our reliefs cut out. Our next step is to go ahead and install our servos in the back of the fuselage. Now, this may seem like we're doing this kind of prematurely, but what we want to do is we want to actually have our servos internal on the tail. That way it gives a little bit nicer look. You don't see those ugly servos popping out. Now, if you're not sure if you want to do that and commit to having servos, you want to recover the servos later without cutting into your airplane, all you simply need to do is forget this step and install them on the outside as you see here. Just to keep in mind, some of the geometry may be a little bit different now. So just cut this relief out, make it bigger if you wish. But I much more prefer, for streamlining and also just the looks, just glue them on the back and just having the arm pop through. For this step, I'm going to go ahead and take a razor blade. I'm just going to put some cuts onto that plastic. Light scratches. You can also use like a 50 grit sandpaper or something, just something to rough up the surface a little bit. And with the extension pointing forward, I'm going to glue this with a servo control horn centered and pointing straight out the center cavity right here. The reason I didn't put edge lines is because every servo is a little bit different, and I don't want you to listen to the edge lines. I want you to put it where the arm needs to be. I'm going to slide this back and forth a little bit, thin out that glue. The more you can spread the glue, the stronger the joint you're going to have. And we're going to repeat the same process on the other side. Our next step while we have the fuselage opened up is we're going to go ahead and connect our servo extensions. Reason being, we can do this later on. It's a lot easier to do it now and tape it in place. And as you fold the fuselage, you don't have to worry about forgetting this step and going back and trying to get your hands through here and reach it out, because this fuselage is going to go together very, very quickly. We have this down. Our next thing we're going to do is I'm just simply going to tape this right above the wing down below here so it doesn't get in our way. These are 12-inch extensions. Now in the past I've kind of referred to this as a C-fold, but it's kind of funny. You can call it whatever you want. But rather than going ahead and having a separate piece to put on the front here to give you the proper down thrust onto your Mustang, I went ahead and just made this so it folds over and makes a nice strong clean paper joint right here. So what we want to do, simply put some glue right up in the front nose here, and also all on this back, and then fold it completely over. And don't slide it to the point where it's stretched. Get this front end nice and perpendicular to the table. And then make sure it's nice and square, push it down, and it's a very strong, clean looking joint. Our next step is going to be to establish a crease on these mark lines right here. Now as I talked before, black lines are cut through, red lines are score cut, and blue lines are either a crease or something to indicate something to be paying attention to. In this case it's a crease. So I'm going to simply hold here, and with the score cut from the speedboat kits, a gentle raise right on the bottom, supporting both sides. That etches enough to give you that crease that you need. We're going to do this on both sides. You go a little more than you think, but don't fold it 90 degrees. Lift it up about 30 degrees or so it just has a little bit of memory. If you don't tell the foam where to bend, it's going to find its own path, and it's not going to look as good. Now we're going to start establishing the shape of the fuselage. As you can see here, this is a B fold on the fuselage. What that means is the bottom or the top plate of the fuselage is going to stay against the ground, and the side cheeks of the fuselage are going to go next to the bottom plate or top plate. So in other words, here's the bottom plate or top plate. As the side cheeks go up, it's going to go next to. It will not go on top of, like the A-folds like you see in the power pods. This is next to. Now, as you can see, we couldn't do an A-fold if we wanted to, because this fold here is going to prevent us from doing that. So just make sure that your side and cheeks of your fuselage are pressed hard up against the table along with your bottom plate. We're going to go ahead and apply a little bit of glue here, and I'm going to favor most of my glue on the side of the bottom plate of the fuselage. And we're going to fold this up. You don't need to rush it. Take your time. And of course, make sure it's 90 degrees. Thanks, Max. Love you. Our one side fuselage cheek is done. We're going to go ahead and do the other one the exact same way. A little glue on the sides. The reason I favor the sides is because if you put it on the very bottom, all you have to do then is squeeze up the glue and around the edge. If you put it on the sides, you're already putting the glue where it needs to be. And when you fold it up, it's going to drive a little bit down into the edge. Just enough so it doesn't cause it to be crooked though. And one thing you notice is I'm keeping the fuselage at the back of the table here. I'm keeping this part off of the table. Reason being is these two tabs here, if you keep it level on the table, you're going to either damage the tabs or cause your fuselage to raise up in the back. It's not going to cause any flight issues, but it's just going to cause some aesthetic issues. So make sure this back part here where your servos are extended off the table. We're going to go ahead and put the bottom of the fuselage in. Now the one thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to cut out this ventilation area until the plane is glued up together. Reason being is I don't want to damage this foam here because there's not much room in here, and as you can see it's quite fragile. Before we do this though, we're going to remove this one piece of paper right here. If you've ever built the FT22, you'll notice that we use this to get a little bit more bend in the foam without causing it to wrinkle. We're doing the exact same thing here. We can actually even now open this up just a little bit. This portion here is going to fit right down to where the angle of the bottom of the fuselage seats, and this will end exactly at the back. Now doing this right will also center up and make sure your fuselage is nice and straight. So with our back extended slightly off the table so we don't damage our two pads, I'm going to go ahead and apply a bead of glue on this first section of the bottom of the fuselage. Now I'm going to go ahead and slide this down into place. And this will also center up your fuselage as you press it down. Now that the bottom is thoroughly dry, we're going to go ahead and test fit and roll this up to the very top. Now because we removed that paper, it should nicely conform to the bottom of the fuselage, but you're going to want to go ahead and use your hands and make sure that you keep everything exactly where it needs to be and nothing's popping up while the glue is drying. So basically supporting the structure and keep those side cheeks of the fuselage nice and tight. Also monitor your side. If you need to use a right angle to make sure you're perpendicular to the table still, go ahead and do so, because if you glue this a little bit crooked, it's not going to affect your flying, it just may affect your looks. We're going to go ahead and apply our glue only up to where the scoop is. Ooh, that's hot. Don't show the pain, don't show the pain. You're going to totally play that, aren't you? Now you don't have to use your finger and burn your fingers like I always do. What you can do is take a scrap piece of foam and scrape the excess off. But when you're scraping it off, you're also driving that paper down and making a stronger glue joint. Extra glue hanging on the outside does not give you anything but extra weight. Our last step is to apply a little bit of glue around the scoop, taking in mind that this is a weaker area because of the thin part of the foam. All the foam's been removed. So I'm just going to put a little bit of glue all three corners. and fold it down and kind of let it form around. You're not going to get a hard edge here. It's going to be nice and round in this area right here. And let that dry. There we are. Now we're working our way up to the front of the fuselage here, and the next piece to go on is the piece that's going to cover the bottom of the wing. We don't need to take any paper on this, but it is going to have a slight flex to it. So when we insert this, we're going to have it on the bottom, and we're just going to focus on the front and the back, just give a little bit of support so it does maintain a little bit of curve when it goes into the fuselage. We're happy with that fit. Go ahead and put some glue down and glue it in. I'll push it right up against that scoop. Now in the past I've talked a lot of times about these little paper reliefs. It's just mainly to give it a little bit more strength and to cover up the ugly edge of the foam board. In the past I've said 0.17 inches is about where you want to go. Lately I've been drawing these at about 0.2. Reason being is that extra little gap here lets the paper wrap over just a little bit more and gives you a little bit more coverage. So if you're designing these planes at home and you want something like this where you just kind of cover the bottom of the foam board, you get a little more strength, make it just a touch wider than the actual foam board itself. Well, and as you can see, I don't know how to put a proper B on my B fold because it's backwards. So I gotta go back and change this. Check your kits and see if it's the right way by now. But the B is backwards, but it doesn't change what it's supposed to be, and that is a B fold, which means your bottom cheek is on the bottom, your side cheeks go next to it, not on top. We love the B folds. We're gonna go ahead and do this. It should be old hat after doing your fuselage. One at a time still, you don't want to rush it. Get those edges nice and 90 degrees to the table and to the bottom plate. My kindergarten teacher's going to be so mad at me. Repeat the process on the other side. Always push against that table whenever you're doing a B fold or an A fold. Use the portion that you're folding up, push against that table, and let that table be your friend. Now this piece here is actually completely optional, but you can choose to use it if you want. One thing I did not like about the Spitfire and some of our other designs is this open cavity right here. And if you look at the stock real Mustang, this area is actually covered with a beautiful duct, and the fuselage is very, very streamlined and very nice looking. When you put a nice big spinner on the front, you don't want to see this big open cavity and your battery and all your guts hanging out. What this will become is a door for the front of your fuselage. Now you can choose to use this step and wrap this in in poster board. We're going to cover that step a little bit later, but we just want to verify that it fits nicely. Nice thing about this is your battery is back here, your leads make its connection here. What this will do is it'll just simply hinge open and give you battery access, and then you can close it back, and that'll all be shown later. We can just put this aside. But everything fits, all the holes line up, we're good to go. Our fuselage has come along great, but now is the time to put on our tail. The first thing we're going to want to do with the tail is where that red score line was on your planes or in the score cut on the speed build kit, go ahead and crack that open and fold it 180 degrees. Now on the elevator, because this part is quite thin here, we don't want to compromise any strength. We're actually going to cut our 45-degree bevel on the stabilizer side. It's going to be completely unnoticed on the bottom, but it'll keep the strength and rigidity without having to beef up that area. If you're really worried about that, you can take a popsicle stick or a little piece of wood and connect these two. But even flying very fast, it doesn't take much to fly this airplane, you're not going to really notice the difference. Repeat the same process on the rudder. But this time, go ahead and actually chamfer it off of the rudder. A lot of people ask how we can do this in one clean swipe. The way we do it is we hold our blade at an excessive angle like this. If you try to cut your 45-degree bevel like this, it's going to chip and tar. And also I use a brand new blade. If you see over here, what I'm always grabbing is just a simple 75 pack of blades, or the kind of little simple single edge razor blades that you get from a automotive store or from a DIY store. These things are very cheap. I think a whole pack of them costs about $6, and I go through them a lot. But by going through them a lot, you're going to get nice clean edges. So when you cut this and hold at an excessive angle, it's going to guide right through, and you can cut very, very thin slices with no problems. Make sure you take off enough they have adequate throws both directions. Doesn't have to be too excessive, only about 16 degrees. One thing that we did early on, and that I really strongly recommend doing on every airplane, is reinforce this with a little bit of hot glue. These planes are lasting longer and longer now because you're getting better and better as a pilot and you're crashing less. So you want them to last longer, but fatigue on the joints can happen eventually. So what we're going to do is we're simply going to press the nozzle of our hot glue gun right down and put a very thin bead of glue right over that seam. And then we're going to take a little scrap piece of foam and we're going to scrape as much out of that seam as possible, so all that's left is the hot glue that has impregnated the foam and the paper. We're going to set that aside and let it dry thoroughly, and repeat the exact same process on the elevator. Now our hinges are nice and dry. You can see they're a little tacky. If say they are a little tacky or you're in a hot climate, sprinkle a little bit of talcum powder in there and it'll take away the stick. I'm going to go ahead now and cut out these 3 little cavities here. They're going to line up with the rudder and the fuselage. Now the open seam or the open hinge is going to face towards the bottom, and the top of the rudder is going to simply slide right on top here. Make sure you don't push down too hard and tilt this back. You want this to be nice and flush on the bottom seam here. We're happy with the fit. I'm going to go ahead and put a little bead of glue here. Place this down. Follow up with a little bead on both sides. It's always a good idea to make sure it's 90 degrees to your surface. Now the fin is properly dried at the stabilizer, we're going to go ahead and slide this down in and do our first test fit. We want to make sure that these little tabs on the fuselage come up and align perfectly with the stabilizer, and that everything sits down nice and firm and clean. We're happy with that fit. We're going to go back, we're going to remove it, remembering the motions it took to put it together. And now we're going to put some glue on these cavities here. Now the cavities the areas we want to put glue on is a little bit ahead of each one of these tabs, behind the tab, and then a nice little bead of glue on both sides here. We're going to repeat the steps that we just did. You don't have to panic, you have a little bit of time to work this glue. Just make sure everything's perpendicular and square where you want it. Now it'll also be a good time to pluck out this little tiny tab if it hasn't already been popped out or cut out. This is going to be the relief for your rudder control horn. And also go ahead and cut out your rear ventilation hole. Now for the formers for the top of the fuselage, you have 3 unique formers, and they progressively get smaller in size here. The smallest one's going to go on the front slot, and the biggest one's going to go on the back slot. And we're going to go ahead and glue those together right now. The wire we're here up in the front, I'm just going to take my finger and pop this up. This is the NACA duct, and we want to get a little bit more breathing through the bottom of the fuselage, or through the fuselage. So I'm just going to put a little bead of glue here. I'm going to push this down back through a hole again and get it about 1/4 of an inch gap there. What this is going to do is as the air blows even inside this little cavity here from the prop, it's going to force it down through the duct on the bottom, and on the back here it's going to create a vacuum, and it's going to give your ESC a little bit extra airflow. We're now ready to go ahead and put on the top turtle deck here. Now as you can see, we designed this as a one-piece turtle deck, but what hopefully will happen here is this back will key in, establish a center line, and I also put a little tiny dot here that should line up exactly with our punch-through hole on our swappable power pod when you secure that in. The hope with this is that it goes down and self-aligns and makes a very, very clean looking top turtle deck. We're going to go ahead and slide this back in and slide it so when we fold these down, they line up just with the front of the fuselage. We're going to roll this over. We're going to get this right on the center here, taking careful note to look on both sides and make sure the paper extends down evenly. The center section here, if we roll this down, you're going to see it lines up perfectly with our hole. That tells me that we're very, very centered. First area we're going to start with the turtle deck is going to be in the back here. We're going to want to move this up against it so both sides of these notches touch the back of the stabilizer. From that point on, it should give you a pretty good reference as far as making sure that both these areas are going down perfectly straight in the same distance. And that looks wonderful. Now just to kind of keep a reference here, I'm going to go ahead and take a little pen, make a little mark on both areas so we know where to slide the paper back to. Then also flip this area up here and put a little bead of hot glue and tack that down. We're actually going to use instant glue on this step. You can use hot glue in the same techniques we used before, but I found that instant glue doesn't melt the foam. I'm using foam safe, but even the non-foam safe, as long as you don't put too much down, it soaks into the paper, gives you an amazingly good bond to the back turtle deck and the poster board pieces that you glued on. It doesn't go anywhere. I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of glue. Don't get too excessive. I'm going to fold this over, and you still have a little bit of work time with this, so you don't have to panic. You simply press down and it'll slowly start to adhere and continue all the way until the whole side is firm up against the foam board. We're going to do it on the exact same thing on the other side, but we're going to put a little bit more tension on it to make sure that taper is nice and tight up against its formers. We're going to repeat the exact same process on these other two, making sure we keep the paper centered as we go towards the nose and that we keep the paper tight up against the fuselage. Our last stage is going to be the front. Now I'm going to do both sides on the front at the same time because when I wrap this down and around, I want to make sure I'm pulling down equally so the front of our nose looks proper. Now this can kind of be according to your taste and how you like it. I like just a little bit around, so when we put about a 2-inch spinner on here, it's going to look beautiful. So you can smash it down as much as you want, or you can leave it up a little bit. I prefer to just take it so just have a little bit of a top radius right about there. I'm going to go ahead and take a pair of scissors now. I'm just going to trim the front edge here. There's about an 1/8 inch or a few millimeters of excess material here that you'll just want to trim flush. That's your cushion. The next thing for this is going to be the canopy, but we're going to go ahead and put this aside and we're going to build our wings now. We have the pieces for our wing all punched out or cut out. Just remember, once again, these lines here are normally red on the plans. That means that you're going to score cut, not cut all the way through. This is going to help us establish our crease. While we're here, let's go ahead and fold back our ailerons and cut our 45-degree bevel in, and then go ahead and seal it with hot glue. Alright, our aileron bevel is done and hot glued. Now we're going to cut a double bevel on the leading edge of our wing. Now this double bevel is the same as the baby blender. Virtually every single plane that we do a double bevel on the leading edge. So it gives a nice round tight leading edge. You don't have to get too excessive, and God forbid you cross over that center line of paper, just use a little bit of piece of tape to repair it. Doesn't have to be perfect. That'll give us an area to crush as we fold over the wing. Now you may wonder what these etchings are right here in this area here. They'll be blue on your plans. What these are is this is going to be a paint stick here. This is going to be reinforcement for a landing gear. One thing I feel very strongly is every warbird should have an option of a landing gear. And if you want to have a landing gear on this Mustang, you can do so. Simply take this paint stick. It doesn't have to be spot on. Just put a little score on both sides. Break it. And the only thing you don't want is you don't want to go past these lines here or behind this line here, because the spar is going to go up against this and then the wing's going to fold over on top of this. If this is a good size, we're going to go ahead and glue it in. While we're here and that's drying, we can cut out our reliefs for our spars. Now with our main spars, we have a main spar and we have a trailing edge spar right here. What this is going to do is give us the proper gap so the wing doesn't fold down and give us unintentional flaps. We're going to simply open up this cavity here, fold it around to 180 degrees, and this should be very familiar with you because it's the same process we use on the Spitfire, Baby Blender, Bloody Wonder, virtually all the planes that have a fold-up wing. Once the spar is glued, go ahead and put a bead of glue on the very bottom of it where the tabs are facing, and then press it down into the lower wing. While this is drying, make sure it's nice and flat. Go ahead and put some glue on the back spar here. It's more of a spacer, not much strength to get out of this. And you'll see some faint etching on the very back, or on your plans it's going to be a blue line. Go ahead and lay that down with that 1/8 inch just a little bit separated. Now before we fold our wing together, we're going to go ahead and install our servo. The servo will need an extension here before we fold it over, and oftentimes I forget that. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on right now. A 6-inch minimum servo extension is what you need. Now because we know this is centered, I'm going to carefully just rotate this so it doesn't push against the bottom of our table. Scratch up the bottom. Once again, you can use sandpaper. This is a little dangerous, so make sure it's roughed up. Then hot glue it so the head of the servo is outside of the wing. You can actually tack this down here if you're afraid of pulling out that servo and making it loose. Just put a little tiny drop so if you do need to get it out for any reason, a steady pull will break it free. At this point, we're ready to start forming our wing. Now to form our wing, we're going to simply start curving it over, and these areas here should naturally start bending. Now if it's a little bit tight, what you can do is very, very gently raise this up and establish those creases for the paper itself. Always tell the foam where you want it to bend. We're going to fold this over, and that's looking really, really good. Now as we fold this over, we're going to want to make sure that the very top surface of this wing, where the middle bend here is parallel to the bottom surface of your wing. Now, this back area here does need to be crushed down a little bit. If you go ahead and put glue on it now, the problem is you're not getting a full joint, a full good strong joint. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply take this razor blade and I'm going to push down against it, and I'm going to establish an angle and kind of crush back the leading edge just to give it a little bit of a taper, because it shouldn't be parallel back there. Doesn't have to be too excessive. Don't need to cut it or anything, just need to crush it down a little bit. So now when this goes all the way to the back, you'll see that this trailing edge meets very nicely. Now we're all ready to glue the wing up. We're going to make sure we have plenty of glue in our hot glue gun, and we're only going to apply glue to the leading edge and the main spar. We're going to address the trailing spar in just a minute. I'm going to put a little drop here on the servo as well. We're going to fold this over. We're going to put all of our energy into making sure that this portion here is parallel with the bottom. Looks good. We're going to go ahead and just press our tip of our nozzle right in this back area, put a bead of glue on the top surface of the wing, and then flat on the table we're going to press down that surface to finish everything off. So just make sure where you're applying the glue to the top of the wing is going to meet with that bottom spar. You don't need to go any further than the spar. Now we're going to go ahead and press this down. You don't want to just press this area, you want to press this whole area here, because the airfoil is going to be a little more extreme at the tips. Your one side of the wing is now totally, completely done. We're just ready for the servos, but we got to do the other side. Now the only difference on the other side of the wing, this paper right here. This paper is going to add as a reinforcement and also clean up the bottom of the wing very nicely. So simply move this foam. Now we're going to go ahead and repeat the exact same steps as before. We're going to bevel our hinge line on our ailerons and reinforce it with hot glue. We're going to do a double bevel on our leading edge. We're going to cut and hot glue on our paint stick. We're going to fold and glue our spar. We're going to glue on our main spar and our trailing spar. We're going to install our servo. We're going to glue down the leading edge and the main spar, making sure that our top is parallel to their bottom. Now we're going to re-glue the trail edge. We now have two wings. Ta-da! Our next step is going to be to join them. Now make sure you do not lose your servo ends inside your wing during this process. We're just going to do a quick test fit. Now you can see why this paper is here. This paper is actually going to give us a little bit of support and also a lot of alignment here as it goes together. So we're going to want to fit this together. Looks really, really good here. And just practice this motion of sliding it together a couple times before we go ahead and glue it finally. Now in the kit and also on the plans, there's a little gauge that looks like this. This is going to be for your dihedral. This is going to go under the wingtip to give you the proper amount of dihedral so you don't have too little or too much. Now with our dihedral gauge ready, we're going to go ahead and place a nice bead of glue on the inside, sharing between the paper and the foam board all the way around. And once again, making sure our servos stay out of the picture. Just going to pick this up and slide the two pieces together. I'm going to use the table as my friend to hold on the one side. I'll pop our dihedral gauge on the other, and with a scrap piece of foam, I'm going to squeegee that hot glue to the outside. And if there's a little bit of paper sticking up, you can always go underneath. Just put a little bit of hot glue there and smear it down. Our wing is now ready to be joined with the fuselage, but before we do so, I'm going to go ahead and take this Y connector. I'm going to join our two ends here, and then tuck the rest down in here. It's a lot easier to pull out one end than two ends. Just going to fold the rest down inside. Now we're going to go ahead and cut out the reliefs for our wing on the fuselage. And before we slide our wing in, because of this paper overlapping, the center section is no longer right where you see the paper, but it's actually where you see this crease. Now it's very easy to see this out in the light, but very difficult when you slide it in. So I'm simply going to make a mark on the leading edge and the trailing edge. So when I sight this up, we're good to go. Now with a little rocking motion and without squeezing too tight on the fuselage or the wing, I'm going to sit the fuselage on the side of the table here. I'm going to simply rock the wing down through. Little rocking motion is all you need to get this into its proper place. And at this point, you can see why we put these etches here. We're going to line this up right in the center, and at the very bottom, we can look through the scoop and make sure this is centered as well. With our wing nice and centered, we're going to go ahead and sight straight down the fuselage and make sure that we're happy with the dihedral of the wing being even between the parallel nature of the stabilizer. If you're happy with everything, now is the time to go ahead and simply put a bead of glue on all four sides of the wing. Now is a great time to go ahead and install your control horns with your linkage stoppers already pre-installed. The linkage stoppers aren't a necessity to have, but they do make adjusting very easy, and especially if you're going to swap your pots from one model to another with the same transmitter. Once you get this dialed in through your linkage stoppers, you don't have to worry about retrimming every time you swap out your plane. We're going to go ahead and put these in. Simply make your cavity, press down. Once you have your cavity open, a bead of glue, and then reseat it. As you can see, the linkage stopper is facing outward. We're going to mirror that right on the other side with the ailerons. With your linkage stopper facing upwards towards the top of the plane, we'll go ahead and install the fin control horn. And with it facing outward on the elevator, we'll install that one as well. Now that we're addressing the control horns, now would be a good time to go ahead and just put in our servo linkages. Now these linkages are much longer than what you need. Reason is that way you can cut them and you can have a little bit of excess for later or future projects. I'm going to go about a ½ inch past where we think we need. We can always trim it shorter later. We're not going to tighten down our linkages until we power up the system and get everything established nice and straight. We're going to repeat this process on every one of our control surfaces. Now would be an excellent time to go ahead and start installing your power pod. Before we go ahead and make our connections though, we're going to need to use 2 barbecue skewers to line up for the very front of the power pod so it dials in and doesn't wobble around. We're going to slide the power pod in and engage the back tabs with it. And you'll know when you can't pull it forward. Now the easiest way to do this is to flip it upside down so the weight of the power pod isn't pulling away from the fuselage. And then take the pointy end of your barbecue skewer and stab it in, and with the twisting motion, push it back about 1 inch or 3 centimeters. And repeat the same process on the other side. Now go ahead and lift it up, disengage the tabs on the back, and slide it on out. With the fuselage still on its back, go ahead and cut about 1.5 inches or about 4 centimeters. 2 dowels. And with our 2 little barbecue skewer alignment dowels cut, we're going to put a little drop of glue in each one of those holes that we punctured. It doesn't have to be too excessive. And with the twisting motion, we're going to push it back until about 1/2 inch or 1.5 centimeters is exposed. At this point, we can start making our connections. Now this is the wide connector, so we know this is our aileron, and it's very easy just to look in the back and see which of these 2 connectors, whether they're the rudder or the elevator go to. We're going to make all of our connections with the receiver. Now, I'm using this little tiny micro receiver here, but always look at your specifications, because not always is it throttle as the very first one. Sometimes it's aileron, and you don't want to connect it wrong. So in this case, I'm going to make my connections. Obviously, we don't need to worry about throttle right now. We're going to connect to aileron, rudder, and in between the rudder and the aileron lies our elevator. Now at this point, we can go ahead and connect our throttle. We're already bound up, and our throttle calibration has already been done. Now the easiest way to go ahead and lock everything nice and neutral is to go ahead and power it on the bench with everything taken apart. Just make sure that if you haven't calibrated your throttle and that you're worried about this, take the prop off if you have any concerns about anything not being right. It only takes 30 seconds to remove the prop and save your fingers and a whole bunch of time with the ER. We're going to power on the transmitter and power up our servos. With all our trim center, we can go to each control surface, center it up, tighten down the linkage stopper. And while we're centering our servos, now would be a really good time to go through each of your control surfaces and dial in your throws. Now, depending on your skill set, you want to dial either high rates or low rates, or have both if you have a computerized radio. But simply hold it right on top of the surface and trim it so it just meets that edge. Once again, about 16 degrees of deflection for high rates, and you can always dial it from there to suit your preference. Now is the time to install our power pod, and we'll start addressing some of the aesthetic touches of the P-51 Mustang. Slide it up and gauge the tanks. If everything is built right, this should pass right through the power pod, and then a little wiggle, find the other hole, and then right out the other end. Roll our blade back and forth, give us about a ½ inch or a little over a centimeter on each side. And the power pod is nice and secure. You can go ahead and put your propeller back on now. Our next step is to put the canopy on. Now this doesn't look like a normal canopy, but I actually found this when I was looking through paper static models. I believe it was a Messerschmitt with a similar design canopy. I went ahead and took their concept and changed it over to a P-51 Mustang. So you can feel free to use this. It comes on black poster board. That way you don't have to paint it. Or you can go ahead and use this as a template and cut it out in clear, and then use the glue and put it together and get a clear canopy as well. You're just going to want to minimize the tanks that overlap it. Now to do this, we're going to want one main fold here that we're going to have to worry about, and that's the longest one. I'm going to use my razor blade to reinforce that. I'm going to go to this tip right here, and I'm going to fold that away from me. Just establish that crease. And then these other guys, I'm just going to let follow suit along with each other. I'm going to do the exact same on the other side. A lot of really good tips on paper static models that can be crossed over to our foamies. Once we have this, we're going to only concentrate on one side, but we're going to start pre-forming and getting the paper to relax in the nice curve here so we don't have to fight it too much. And I'm going to go back to my CA glue once again. You can use hot glue if you want. Just be very patient and don't let go of it for a good long time to make sure you have a good solid fit. I'm going to put a thin bead of glue on these little things. You don't have to go too much because it spreads out quite a bit. And then letting this part go inward just a little bit on the top plate. I'm going to wrap this around and meet up with the bottom right there. I'm lining the edge of the paper right on the outer edge of that fold that we made. That's why it's so crucial to get a nice tight fit. I'm going to repeat the exact same process on the other side. At this point, I'm going to let the paper favor a little bit on the outside here. I'm going to put some reinforcement on the top with some hot glue right over these two cracks here. I'm not going to touch it, I'm not going to push it in, I'm just going to let it dry. Now with our canopy all dry and ready to be fit on the fuselage, you can get a couple different looks out of this. You can position it where a Mustang usually has that, which is just the tip of it just behind the trailing edge. Or if you want to get a nice Reno Air Racer look, you can always move it further back and get that sleek Reno Air Racer look. It's totally your preference. For me, we're going to go for scale right now. I'm going to go back to my instant glue, put a small bead right around the perimeter. On the sides, I'm not too worried about the front because it doesn't make real aggressive contact. Get it centered in the front, drop it down in the back, and then push down on the sides. Now these are optional accessories here, but if you choose, our next step is to cover up this bottom area here with the hatch. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to take this included piece, either it's drawn on the plans or included in the speed build kit, and we're going to lay this down with about a centimeter to a ½ inch gap here. We're going to go ahead and center this and glue the back side down, one side at a time. With that dry, we're going to place a bead of glue on both sides, all the way up and around to the very front. Now we're going to roll this down, and we're going to guide this, keeping the side cheeks parallel to the edge of the poster board paper. The tighter the fit you get, the better it's going to be. At this point, we can cut off the excess. Now we're free to slide this down in, check our fit. Now there's 2 holes here. These 2 holes should line up perfectly with a little dowel. If you're using this option, you're going to want to run a barbecue skewer through this front. But first we got to secure the back. We're going to do that by a little bead of hot glue. And once again, we'll run our our barbecue skewer straight on through, right on to the outside. If you're doing the scratch build, go ahead and do one side, then go to the other side and do the other side. Don't try to run it straight through. Most likely you're going to miss your marks and it'll pop out some part you don't want it to. Now we're going to go ahead and just trim this down a little bit more narrow than our power pod. Once again, you don't need to do this. It's completely aesthetic, but if you put the spinner on the front, it'll look much nicer. Our last step in the process is the landing gear. Now this is once again another optional choice. If you want to belly land this and you don't have a place to take off and land, you can leave it off. I like to put the landing gear on because when I land it doesn't damage the scoop as easily. To do this, I'm going to go ahead and take the included, I believe this is 1/10 inch for over the pond. I want to say it's 2 millimeter, maybe 3 millimeter. It always doesn't hurt to go one size thicker. It's 15.5 inches long or 39.5 centimeters long. We're going to go ahead and dissect this right down the middle, and in this case it's going to be 7 3/4 inches. We're going to cut this. At this point we're going to actually use the wing as our gauge. We're going to do our first bend to match up this measurement right here. We're going to bend at 90 degrees. There we are. Doesn't have to be absolute perfect. Our second bend is going to be right at this edge right here. We're going to bend this upwards, roughly almost 90, maybe 80 degrees there. So it has a little bit of bow forward, as you can see. And if anything doesn't look quite right, you can always just kind of give it slight little bends to make sure you're happy with the way everything's sitting. Our final bend is going to be just a little bit over an inch, about 1 1/8 inches, and we're going to match that parallel with our back bend here. This is going to be for your wheels. Now we include wheels in our kit that are foam board. There's a video, I believe, on the power pod that shows you how to build those. They'll last a little while, but if you want to put your own wheels on, that's fine too. We just want to include wheels in case you didn't have a set. We're just going to go ahead and do this test fit. We're going to slide this in, seat it down into the wing, and just check for parallelness, check for fit. Everything looks good. Now at this point, we're going to match our next piece to this exactly, and that'll go on this wing. We're just going to mirror it. Now would be a great time to go ahead and install your wheels. Now I'm going to use these ones from Laser Toys here just because they're a little bit more durable than the paper ones that we include free in the kit. You can also use a wheel collar. This hot glue is free. Alright, before we install our landing gears, I'm going to lay a bead of glue down into the pocket that we created when we test fit it. And now I'm going to go back in. I'm going to insert the landing gear down into that hot bead of glue. And I'm going to follow over with another bead of glue right over top of it. Fill in a little more. Now I'm just going to take a scrap piece of foam, really press it in there as thick as possible, and then wipe off the excess. We're going to let that dry. We're not going to touch it through the drying process. Give it a good 5 minutes or so because it's very, very hot right now. And the stronger it's set up without any movement, it's going to be even more rigid. We're going to repeat the exact same process on the other side. Our landing gear is all dry. Our last step here is we're going to power on our radio, and I'm going to install the battery, and we're going to check our CG. I'm going to simply flip this open now. We'll slide our battery, and unlike the Spitfire, the battery is going to go back a little ways here. Depending on the battery that you like to power it with. Just behind this crease right here should be pretty good. And the way we can tell is we can just use these reference marks and check for our CG. Go a little bit further back. Don't worry, it's not so far back that you can't get to it. When this battery is properly positioned, on a normal 22 size battery, you're going to have about 1 inch or 3 centimeters in front of the leading edge exposing here. Just go ahead and check your CG. The CG, the easiest way to describe it, this very first ridge here, it's about 20% back on the wing, is your CG mark. Looks pretty good. Can be a little nose heavy. These things like a little bit more nose weight. Now we're going to go ahead and make our connection and seal off our hatch. Well, friends, she's all built. She's ready to test fly. We're going to see if we can beat this wind and rain coming. Oh, man. She flies good. No problem with speed, huh? Vertical's fantastic. And one of my favorite things about this is the ailerons are just so linear. Let's do a knife edge here. And we'll bring it right around into the wind and then full back on the elevator. And there's full back. We could drive that all the way to the ground and land it if we wanted to. Alright, let's check inverted here. Alright, let's bring around for a landing here. I'll take it. Friends, I want to sincerely thank you for watching. I want to thank you for making Flite Test what it is today. And please go to flitetest.com, look up the article, FT Mustang Build. At the very bottom of the article is the downloadable plans. If you want the speed build kit, go to our store. It's found at flitetest.com as well. In the upper hand, just click store, and you can support us through buying the speed build kit. But most of all, I want to thank you for bringing Flite Test to what it is, sharing memories and growing people in the hobby. All right, see you next time.